A poor girl frustrated with her ex-kisses. A stranger without knowing he's a millionaire. What he did next will surprise you. Before we begin, the story. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Let's dive into the story together. Lucy Hart was having the worst day she'd had in months. It started with her spilling hot coffee all over her favorite canvas shoes. Then came the missed bus, and finally, the cherry on top. A call from her ex-boss just to remind her, one last time, that she wasn't cut out for modern journalism. The city felt heavier that morning. Her confidence, already paper-thin, was unraveling thread by thread. To clear her head, Lucy wandered into the nearest shopping center. She wasn't planning to buy anything, certainly not with her bank account gasping for air, but something about the glitter of lights and glass displays felt like a temporary escape. She turned into a jewelry store, intending only to browse the clearance rack. But the moment she stepped in, she froze. There, in the middle of the store, was Ryan, her ex. The same man who once scoffed at marriage proposals and claimed rings were meaningless capitalism. Now, he was down on one knee, holding out a sparkling diamond to a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a luxury magazine. The woman was stunning. Sleek hair, designer dress, glowing skin. And the ring? It looked like it could pay Lucy's rent for the next 5 years, plus utilities. Lucy felt the floor tilt beneath her. She took a step back, chest tightening, ready to slip away quietly. But Ryan had already seen her. Their eyes locked. And in that instant, she saw it. The smug flicker in his expression. A smirk. A silent, devastating, "See? This is what you lost." Her pride shriveled, her heart boiled, and then something wild happened. Lucy turned sharply, grabbed the arm of the nearest man, and kissed him. A full, impulsive, reckless kiss. Her heart pounded in her ears. She wasn't even sure why she'd done it. Maybe to shake Ryan, maybe to reclaim some power, maybe just to prove to herself that she was still unpredictable, still alive. What she didn't expect was how the stranger responded. Instead of pulling away, he leaned in, calm and sure, like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. His hand gently settled at her waist. He kissed her back, soft but certain. Then he smiled, leaned toward her ear and said, "Sorry I'm late, sweetheart." His voice was smooth, low, impossibly steady. The entire store seemed to hold its breath. Before Lucy could process what was happening, he slid his arm around her and casually walked her out, leaving Ryan and his perfectly poised fiancée frozen in disbelief. Outside, Lucy's pulse was still racing. She was halfway to panic when the stranger turned to her and spoke, calm as ever. She had just kissed a total stranger. And somehow, he had made it feel like the most natural thing in the world. Little did she know, this man she'd kissed on a wild whim? He was about to turn her life upside down. And that was only the beginning. He didn't flinch. The kiss, out of nowhere, uninvited, unexplainable, should have startled any sane man. But this one? No. He simply turned toward her, calm as the surface of a still lake, and slipped an arm gently around her waist. Then he spoke, smooth even, like silk brushing over glass. "Sorry I kept you waiting, darling." Lucy blinked. Her brain stalled. Her heart stammered. She'd just committed social arson, and this man was playing along? Before she could stammer out a confused apology or bolt for the door, he took the lead, guiding her gracefully out of the store, past the stunned gaze of Ryan and his picture-perfect fiancée. No drama, no awkwardness, just a perfectly timed retreat, like a scene rehearsed 100 times before. Only it wasn't. It wasn't until they reached a quiet sidewalk cafe a block away that Lucy finally found her voice. I'm so sorry, I don't even know what that was. I panicked, She stammered, eyes wide, chest tight, adrenaline still crackling through her limbs. But the man, he just smiled. Not mocking, not smug. Amused. Calm. As if he was used to strangers kissing him in jewelry stores. He offered his hand like they were meeting for the first time. Nicholas Scott. The name didn't register right away, but it would soon. I'd say it's a pleasure, but considering how we met, I think we've already passed the formal stage. There was a glint in his eye. Not arrogance, but something far more dangerous. Control. Lucy hesitated before shaking his hand, unsure if she'd just accidentally kissed a serial killer or a magician. Turns out it was neither. He was something rarer, a man with power, poise, and a secret agenda. Nicholas Scott, low-profile entrepreneur, media-shy, scandal-free, one of those mysterious figures finance blogs love to obsess over, always mentioned with phrases like private fortune, off-the-grid estate, and unattached, as far as we know. And then, over a cappuccino that Lucy never even remembered ordering, he made her an offer. I need someone to play a role, he said simply, as if he were offering her a job as a waitress, not a lead in a personal theater of deception. A girlfriend, for 1 month. My family is flying in from Europe, and I need to convince them I'm in a stable, loving relationship. Lucy stared, waiting for the punchline, but it never came. In return, I can make sure you get the job you've been chasing, the one you're qualified for, but no one will give you because you're too bold for broadcast, as one network so elegantly put it. That hit a nerve. He didn't smile when he said it. He didn't need to. He'd clearly done his homework. She scoffed. You're insane. Possibly, but I'm also right. He handed her a card. Just a name and a number. Classic, elegant, ominous. Lucy didn't take it. I don't do fake dating, she muttered, half rising from the table. You just kissed a complete stranger to get back at your ex, Nicholas replied, his tone dry as dust. Forgive me, but I think we've passed the threshold of what you don't do. That shut her up, because he wasn't wrong. Lucy left without taking the card. But 2 nights later, when the rent bill arrived and her inbox remained mercilessly empty, she picked it up. And called. No one in their right mind would agree to this. But Lucy? She wasn't sure she'd been in her right mind since Ryan crushed her self-worth with a diamond ring and a polished smile. So she said yes. To 1 month, 1 game, 1 absurd, emotionally dangerous performance. What she didn't know was that Nicholas Scott wasn't just hiding from his family. He was hiding from himself, and in playing pretend, he was about to lose something far more real than his reputation. Lucy signed the contract. There was no ceremonial handshake, no thunderous music swelling in the background, just the soft scratch of pen to paper and the dull thud of her inner voice begging her to turn back. Too late. The moment her name curved across the dotted line, she stepped out of her old life, chaotic, cramped, filled with unpaid bills and lukewarm coffee, and into a bizarre new chapter that seemed stolen from the final draft of a romantic comedy, with more legal clauses. Nicholas Scott, the elusive millionaire with eyes that gave away nothing, didn't even blink as she finished signing. Instead, he reached across the table, tapped the corner of the paper, and said in that maddeningly calm voice, "Well then, let's get started." And just like that, Lucy found herself swept into a world that didn't play by her rules. The first thing Nicholas insisted on changing was everything she owned. They started at a boutique so exclusive it didn't have a sign, just a bronze door and a receptionist who looked like she walked straight off a Vogue runway. Lucy stood frozen for a full 10 seconds before Nicholas leaned in and murmured, "Don't look intimidated. They can smell it. Inside, the lighting was moody, the mirrors oddly forgiving, and the price tags traumatic. Nicholas sat back in a sleek leather chair as stylists buzzed around Lucy, bringing in silks and sequins like bees to a rose. At first she fidgeted, trying not to spill nervous laughter all over the chiffon. But then she saw herself in the mirror. A navy satin gown. Sleek, understated, powerful. It hugged her like a secret and transformed her reflection into someone she barely recognized, but wanted to know better. She stepped out slowly, trying not to trip on the hem. Nicholas looked up. His gaze swept over her, unreadable at first. Then, slowly, one corner of his mouth lifted. Not a smirk, not a condescending grin, just acknowledgement. "That one," he said quietly. "High heels are not shoes," Nicholas instructed next. "They're weapons. Own them." Lucy wobbled like a baby deer learning to walk for the first time. She cursed under her breath, apologized to a mannequin, and once stumbled so hard she nearly knocked over a $900 hat stand. Nicholas didn't laugh. Not really. He just shook his head with a smile so subtle, it felt like encouragement disguised as amusement. At their first etiquette lesson, Nicholas gently corrected the way she held a champagne flute. "This isn't beer pong," he said with dry humor, adjusting her grip. His fingers brushed hers. A jolt. Tiny, sharp, but unmistakable. Lucy blinked, unsure if it was the bubbles or just her nerves rebelling. Their debut as a couple came at a high-profile charity gala, the kind of place where laughter was rehearsed, smiles were currency, and eye contact meant war. Lucy wore the navy gown. The heels. A layer of nerves under her newly powdered confidence. As they walked in, Nicholas leaned closer, eyes on the room. "You don't have to fit in," he murmured. "Just act like you've already turned down 3 better parties." She wanted to laugh, but instead she straightened her back and slipped her arm through his. Inside, everything sparkled. The chandeliers, the dresses, the ambition. She tried not to stare too long at the people who looked like they'd stepped out of magazine covers. But then, she saw him. Ryan, her ex, across the room, in a tux that probably cost more than her last 3 paychecks combined. His fiancée glowed at his side. Beautiful, polished, wrapped in diamonds. Lucy froze, but before the dread could flood her, Nicholas slid his hand to her waist. "Smile," he whispered. "He's watching." And she did. Not the tight, forced grin of someone pretending, but a real, radiant smile, born of sudden power. Because Ryan's eyes widened, his jaw tightened, he blinked. She had never seen him look like that. That night something shifted. She no longer felt like a pawn in someone else's game. She was playing now. But it wasn't just the glances from other guests, or Ryan's visible discomfort that stayed with her as they left. It was Nicholas. The way he looked at her when he thought no one noticed. The way his fingers lingered at the small of her back, like he'd forgotten to let go. The way his voice dropped lower, gentler, when he leaned in to say, "You're doing better than you think." Her heart stumbled. Just for a second. Not a fall? Not yet. Just a flutter. But that tiny misstep was real, and it frightened her more than champagne bubbles, stilettos, or headlines ever could, because it meant something was changing. Something neither of them had planned. And as Nicholas opened the car door for her that night, and she slid in under the weight of diamond-drenched silence, he smiled at her. Just briefly. Like he knew. Like he felt it too. It began not with a bang, but a flicker. A flash of light so routine it should have gone unnoticed. A camera lens, hidden behind the velvet ropes at a charity gala, caught what looked like a tender moment. Nicholas Scott, tailored to effortless perfection, leaned in close to Lucy, his arm resting casually, almost protectively, around her waist. Her body tilted toward him without thought, as though gravity itself favored the illusion they were selling. It was one frame, 1 second. And by sunrise, it had set the internet ablaze. Nicholas Scott, the reclusive millionaire known for dodging paparazzi and dismissing public speculation, had finally been caught with a woman on his arm. Not just any woman. A mystery woman. An unknown. A nobody. Lucy's name was on every screen before she even opened her eyes that morning. Nicholas Scott. Off the market? Who is the woman beside him? From obscurity to spotlight, meet Nicholas's alleged girlfriend. Too plain or just right? Twitter debates. Lucy's look at Gala. Her phone lit up like a Christmas tree on fire. Emails, missed calls, messages from friends, strangers, old classmates. Some offered congratulations. Others weren't so kind. The press, ruthless and unsleeping, descended like vultures. There were side-by-side comparisons to Nicholas's rumored past flings, makeup breakdowns, expert commentary on her fashion choices, Reddit threads with thousands of comments debating whether she was a gold digger or refreshingly normal. And Lucy? She felt like she was drowning in a sea of people shouting her name for the first time. And for all the wrong reasons. She was no longer invisible. She was exposed. She sat on the edge of Nicholas's penthouse sofa, knees drawn to her chest, watching the news with the kind of hollow disbelief reserved for people who've just seen their own obituary scroll across the screen. Her face was everywhere, but she felt like she was disappearing. Like her real self, quiet, awkward, trying, had been shoved aside to make room for a fictional version she didn't recognize. Nicholas entered the room in a crisp shirt, his movements unbothered, his expression unreadable. He tossed the morning paper onto the coffee table without looking at her. "Welcome to my world," he said, as if it were the punchline to an old joke. To him, it was noise, static, something he'd long since stopped hearing. To her, it was a scream in the dark, and yet, strangely, unexplainably, amid all the chaos, something about Nicholas began to change. Or maybe she started noticing things she hadn't before. He didn't shield her with grand declarations or PR statements, but he noticed when she flinched at her reflection on a gossip blog and quietly removed every tablet and phone from the room. He didn't lecture her about composure, but when she paced the floor in anxiety, he walked beside her, silent, present. He remembered the way she took her coffee. He carried a spare scarf in his coat for her, just in case it gets drafty. And then, one night, without fanfare, he handed her a small velvet box. Inside, a necklace. Simple, elegant, unassuming. It wasn't the price tag that mattered. It was the memory, because months ago she had mentioned it in passing, scrolling online during a car ride, laughing that it was too classy for someone like me. He hadn't replied. She thought he hadn't even heard. But he had. He had remembered. And now, in the middle of a fabricated romance spiraling far beyond either of their control, he gave her something real. That night, Lucy couldn't sleep. Not because of the noise outside, the cameras clicking from across the street, or the articles stacking up like accusations, but because of the silence inside. Inside her mind. Inside her heart. It was a silence filled with questions she didn't know how to ask. Was this part of the plan? Was Nicholas still acting? Were they still acting? Or had they, without realizing, blurred the line between reality and pretense? She tried to ask him once. The words hovered at the edge of her mouth during dinner. But Nicholas looked at her then, across candlelight and shadows, and whatever answer she wanted. It stayed behind his eyes, unspoken, intact, She didn't push, because deep down, she was afraid of the truth. Afraid that it was real, or worse, that it wasn't. And so she smiled at cameras. She laughed at parties. She stood beside him as the world watched. But inside, she began to fall, quietly, terrifyingly, without permission. Because the scariest part of pretending is when you realize you're not pretending anymore. Nicholas didn't make the suggestion casually. He never did anything casually. It was over coffee, one cold morning, steam curling in the quiet space between them, when he looked at her and said, "My father is coming into town. He's traditional. He won't believe this is real unless we live under the same roof." Lucy froze, her spoon halfway to her mouth. Live with him? In his world of sleek granite countertops and silent elevators and suits that cost more than her rent? At first, she wanted to say no. Flat out, "No thank you. I'm just an employee, no." But something in his voice, something uncharacteristically hesitant, made her hesitate too. So she nodded, quietly, and moved in. At first it was awkward in all the ways living with a stranger should be. The fridge was too quiet, the house too big. She could hear her own thoughts bouncing off the walls. But then something strange happened. The silence filled with life. Mornings became rituals. He made eggs, always over easy, always a little burnt. She made coffee, strong and too sweet. He hated the sweetness but never complained. She hated the burnt eggs but never said a word. They argued, too, about towels on the bathroom floor, whether dishes should be rinsed before going into the dishwasher, or how he always seemed to rearrange her side of the bookshelf. And yet, the arguments were soft, familiar. Like two people learning the same language at different speeds. Nights were even softer. They watched old movies together. At first, they sat on opposite ends of the couch. Then, slowly, as the days slipped by, the distance shrank. By week 2, her feet were tucked under his thigh, his hand draped along the back of the couch, brushing her shoulder without thinking. Nicholas, the man who had seemed untouchable, began to unravel in tiny, human ways. He told her about the woman he had once loved, how she wasn't from the right circles, how his family had made her feel like a mistake, how he let them convince him they were right, and how he hadn't believed in love since. "But with you," he said, staring into the firelight one night, "I can breathe." Lucy didn't know what to say. The truth was, she didn't know how long she'd been falling for him. Maybe it started when he brought her that necklace. Maybe it started earlier, when he laughed, that rare, quiet laugh that barely reached his lips. Or maybe it started the moment he let her into his guarded world and didn't ask her to be anyone else but herself. But by now, it wasn't a question anymore. She was in love with him. Deeply, helplessly. And that terrified her, because nothing about their story had ever been real, on paper. But here, in this strange little routine built on burnt eggs and midnight movies, it felt more real than anything she'd ever known. And that was the danger, wasn't it? She didn't know where the role ended and the truth began. But she knew this much. If it was all pretend, then she was pretending with her whole heart. And if it was real, then she had everything to lose. It had been raining earlier. The kind of soft, persistent drizzle that made the city glow under streetlights and left the windows of Nicholas's penthouse streaked with watery lines, like tears the sky hadn't asked permission to shed. Inside, the atmosphere was heavier than the weather outside. The apartment stood still, as if holding its breath. No music, no chatter, no light beyond the low amber lamp in the corner, casting a warm halo over the polished floor and gilded moldings. Everything looked perfect, untouched. But in that perfection was a sterile, aching void. Nicholas sat alone, hunched slightly in the armchair by the fireplace that wasn't lit. A glass of red wine rested in his hand, though it had long gone warm. The other hand gripped the armrest like it was the only thing anchoring him to the present. Across the room, Lucy stood with her back straight and her heart trembling. Her suitcase, simple, scuffed, loyal, was upright at her side. She had packed it quietly that morning, folding each blouse and dress with the same care she once used to patch holes in her life. But now, everything felt different. Too clean. Too final. She was dressed simply. Sweater, jeans, boots, but she had never looked more out of place in the room that had become hers. And not hers, all at once. Nicholas didn't look up at first. He didn't have to. He could feel her leaving in the way the air shifted, in the way the silence tasted. When he finally did raise his eyes, they were dark, unreadable, but something inside had already cracked. "Are you really going to leave?" His voice was low, controlled, but not cold. Lucy turned her face slightly, enough that the lamp hit the shimmer in her eyes. "That's what we agreed," she said, carefully choosing each word. 1 month. No more. Tonight's the last night." He stood. Slowly. Methodically. As if his body wanted to delay the moment just a little longer. He walked toward her, 1 step at a time, until he was close enough to see the way her breath caught in her chest. "And if I asked you to stay?" There was no desperation in his tone, only sincerity. Raw and dangerous. Lucy let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped for days. She gave a small, bitter laugh. One of those laughs meant to keep the tears from winning. "Don't," she said gently. "Please don't say that unless you're absolutely sure. I can't be the one who believes in something. That was never real." Nicholas's brow furrowed, but not in frustration, in hurt. "Do you really think this has been pretend for me?" He took another step forward. The distance between them was nothing now. And yet, it was everything. "I don't know what to think," Lucy whispered. "I don't know when this stopped being fake. Maybe it never was. Maybe I just wanted it to be more. But I don't know where I stand, Nicholas. I don't know what's true anymore." He looked down, like the answer might be hidden in the floorboards, then back at her. "I don't remember the first time I looked at you and forgot we had a contract," he said, voice heavy. "But I remember every time after that, every time you laughed at my bad jokes, every time I watched you talk to people like you belonged in their world, even when you didn't think you did. Every morning you stayed a little longer before leaving the room." His voice dropped lower. "Every time I wished this wasn't pretend." Lucy bit her lip. Her hand clutched the suitcase handle tighter. Her other hand trembled, fingers curling inward as if holding back a confession. "I want to believe you," she whispered. "God, I want to. But what if this is just some twisted kindness? What if you only feel something because I'm convenient? Because I played the role so well you forgot it was a role?" Her voice broke. "I can't stay if I'm just an idea you liked having around." There was a beat of silence. A long, painful pause, where everything unsaid clung to the walls like invisible dust. Nicholas reached out. His hand hovered near hers, just inches away. But then, he pulled it back. That single moment, the moment he didn't touch her, said more than words ever could. Lucy nodded slowly. A single tear slid down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. "I guess that's my answer?" She turned, walked to the door. Each step was measured, deliberate. And then, she was gone. The door closed behind her with a soft click that echoed like a gunshot through the apartment. Nicholas remained frozen where she'd left him, still holding the glass of wine he never tasted. His chest rose and fell once, twice, but he didn't speak. He didn't chase. Outside, the city was still alive. Honking cars, buzzing lights, people hurrying through puddles. Inside, Nicholas stood alone in the golden silence as the clock on the wall ticked onward, marking not just the hour, but the moment everything he hadn't said turned into everything he had just lost. The rain had returned that afternoon. Soft, steady, as if the sky itself remembered what it felt like to ache. 3 days had passed since Lucy walked away from that apartment, and from the man she loved but didn't dare believe in. But her heart hadn't quieted. It whispered through sleepless nights, ticked in rhythm with the clock, echoed in every raindrop that tapped against her window. That evening, she stood outside the jewelry store where it had all begun, the same shop where Nicholas had left a necklace she'd only mentioned once in passing. Through the misted glass, it still sat there. Small, unassuming. But to Lucy, it weighed more than a promise. She stepped back. Then suddenly she ran. Her shoes hit the wet pavement hard, rain slapping against her face and soaking through her coat. Her breath came in gasps, but she didn't slow down. She didn't care. When she reached the familiar door, she was drenched and shivering. She knocked once, then again. Harder. Each knock like a heartbeat on the edge of panic. The door opened. Nicholas stood there, shirt rumpled, eyes wide like the world had just stopped moving. "Lucy?" he said, barely above a whisper. She didn't say a word. She stepped forward and threw her arms around him. No hesitation, no apology, just a desperate, shaking embrace. Her face pressed into his chest like maybe, just maybe, she could forget the 3 days apart if she held him tightly enough. "I left," she choked out, voice cracking, but my heart never did. He wrapped her in his arms, pulling her close as if anchoring himself in the reality of her. "I waited for you. Every night," he murmured. "Every knock, every footstep. I thought it might be you. And every time it wasn't. I hated myself for letting you go." She looked up at him, eyes glassy but burning with something raw and real. "I was scared," she said. "Scared that if this was just pretend, I'd be the only one who fell. But if I didn't come back, I'd regret it for the rest of my life." Nicholas raised a hand to her cheek, as gently as if he feared she might vanish under his touch. "Lucy," he said, "nothing about this was pretend. You are the most real thing that's ever happened to me, in a life full of masks." She let out a shaky laugh, tears slipping down her cheeks. "So, am I allowed to love you for real now?" He didn't answer. He just kissed her. Slow. Deep. Certain. It wasn't a kiss for show. It wasn't the kind of kiss you give because you should. It was the kind you give because you can't not. Because the moment demands it. Because your soul recognizes the one it belongs to. Outside, the rain kept falling. But inside, warmth returned. And in that quiet room, with an unopened suitcase still sitting in the corner, Nicholas and Lucy stood in each other's arms, hearts finally sewn back together by the same trembling hands that once let go. The night was clear. Above the city, high on a rooftop strung with fairy lights and flickering candles, time seemed to pause. There was no orchestra, no red carpet, no paparazzi or choreographed spectacle. Just warm laughter, the scent of jasmine in the evening air, and a feeling, so tender and certain. It could only be love. Nicholas stood at the center of it all, in a suit that managed to look both timeless and completely undone by emotion. In his hands, he held a weathered book. Not just any book, but the one they'd once fought over in a cramped little bookstore, back when everything between them was still a carefully rehearsed illusion. He took a breath, then opened it. Nestled inside, right between the pages they'd once pretended to love for show, was a velvet box. and inside that box was the ring. Nicholas knelt, slow, intentional, and looked up at Lucy, who stood barefoot on the rooftop tiles, her dress catching the wind like a story waiting to be written. His voice was low, unshaking. I never believed in love, not really. I thought it was a myth people clung to like fairy dust. But then, a girl kissed me in the middle of a jewelry store. Not because she knew who I was or what I owned, but because life had pushed her to a moment she couldn't script. And somehow, in that chaos, everything real began. Lucy laughed through the tears in her eyes. Not the delicate kind. The full, open kind, like she'd just come up for air after holding her breath far too long. Her voice wavered as she answered, "I never believed in miracles. I thought life was about surviving, not dreaming. But then I signed a contract I thought would break me, and instead, it led me home. He offered the ring." She didn't even glance at it. She just cupped his face in her hands and whispered, "Yes." The applause came gently from close friends and chosen family, not because tradition demanded it, but because joy couldn't help but spill out. Later that evening, as the city lights sparkled below and the stars seemed to lean in just a little closer, the newlyweds danced. No choreography, no rehearsed steps, just the soft shuffle of two people who finally knew where they belonged. And this time, no one had to pretend. Because the story, once built on make-believe, had written itself into something breathtakingly real. And tucked inside an old book on a quiet rooftop, love had found its perfect page. Sometimes, what starts out as a game or a reckless impulse ends up leading us to the most honest place in our hearts. Love doesn't need a perfect beginning, as long as it ends with sincerity. And sometimes, a hug in the rain says more than 1,000 promises ever could. How did this story make you feel? Did it move you? Have you ever found yourself in a pretend-turned-real situation? Do you believe a relationship that starts as a contract can turn into true love? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts with us. If you enjoyed this story, please support us by rating it from 1 to 10 in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next emotional, funny, and unexpected love story. Thank you for watching until the end, because every person who connects with the story makes it feel a little more real.